My name is Natalie Ellison. And on the day I graduated from UCLA with honors in social psychology, the June sky shone so brightly it felt like the universe itself was sending me a silent congratulations. The sun spread evenly across the vast campus, resting on every treetop and blade of grass, making everything glow. Cheers, applause, and the calling of names echoed through the crowd of students dressed in navy gowns and golden tassel caps. I stood there, right in the middle of the stage, looking out at the rows of guests. And among the sea of beaming faces, I saw my father. He sat in the third row, slightly to the right. Next to him was Samantha, the woman he once called his colleague, and now his wife, even though my mother hadn't passed away yet when their involvement began. Beside her sat Lily, their daughter, my half-sister, 4 years younger than me. The three of them sat together, but apart from the other family groups. No sign of my mother, no congratulatory banners, not a single glance from them truly aimed at me. My father met my gaze from the stage, but didn't smile, didn't wave, he simply nodded, as if I had just completed a task he had always doubted I could. I took my diploma and walked off stage as the announcer called my name, but an unnamed emptiness clenched tight in my chest. I thought I had grown used to it by now. To my father's present absence. To the kind of support from afar that came in the form of templated congratulatory texts from his phone every year. To always having to take care of myself, live on my own, grow up on my own. But still, foolishly, I hoped that today, a day as important as this, he might see me differently. But no, he was still him. Franklin Burke, a man who knew how to create a child, but never learned how to stay in her life. After the ceremony, as the crowd slowly dispersed and my friends gathered for photos, I saw my father signaling for me to come over. We walked to a quiet corner behind Powell Library, where a few wooden benches sat beneath the purple jacaranda trees. He didn't hug me, didn't praise me, didn't ask where I wanted to go celebrate. Instead, he pulled out his phone from his suit pocket, glanced at it for a few seconds as if checking the time, then looked up and spoke, his tone oddly calm. Lily got into USC, but the tuition's high, and her mother and I haven't saved enough. Now that you've graduated, you should help your sister. It's not too much each term, just a few thousand. I know you can manage. I stood there, frozen. Before I could respond, he continued this time, his voice hardened, cold as ice. And if you refuse, then starting next week, don't come back home. I don't remember how long I stood there. But I remember every detail. The sunlight filtering through the leaves, casting a half shadow over his face, Samantha's eyes watching us from a distance, calm, slightly smug, like she was observing the outcome of a deal she already knew she'd won. And Lily, head down, silent. No protest, no shame. I couldn't tell if she was too afraid to speak, or if she truly believed she deserved it. I didn't argue. Not a word. Not a tear. I just looked at my father for a long moment, as if trying to burn that image of him into my memory so I'd never forget. Then I turned and walked away, my hand clenched tightly around the phone in the pocket of my graduation gown. All the noise around me faded, leaving only the sound of my footsteps on the red brick path and the pounding of my heartbeat in my chest. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling slightly. Without much thought, I dialed a familiar number, a number I hadn't called all semester because I didn't want him to worry. But this time was different. The phone rang just once before the other end picked up. My grandfather's voice came through, deep and warm, just as I remembered. "Natalie, what's wrong, sweetheart?" My throat tightened, my lips quivered, but I didn't cry. I simply said, "I think I need to come home. To my real home." Longpeng. I drove back to Santa Barbara that very night, while streaks of sunset still lingered on the rooftops along Highway 101. My father's words kept echoing in my mind like a cold knock in an empty hallway. "If you refuse, then starting next week, don't come back home." I didn't talk back, didn't cry, didn't shake. But once I got in the car and gripped the steering wheel, I could feel memories of my younger self surfacing with every breath I took. I used to think I was born into a fortunate family. My mother was a pediatrician at Cedars-Sinai, smart, gentle, and so devoted to children that every kid she treated called her the angel in the white coat. My father, Franklin, was a senior manager at a logistics company in Long Beach. He traveled often for work, but every time he came back, he brought me small gifts: a unicorn-shaped pen, a children's book signed by the author, or a few peppermint candies in the exact flavor I liked. We lived in a modest home in Glendale not far from my school, not luxurious, but cozy and full of laughter. Or at least, that's what I believed, until I turned 13. When my mother began to suspect something, she didn't speak of it right away. I just noticed she grew quieter, often staring at my father's phone, then quickly putting it down whenever I entered the room. On nights when my father said he was away on business, I'd hear her lying in bed, shifting restlessly, as if listening for something in the silence. Once, I saw her lift one of his dress shirts to her nose and freeze when she caught a faint, unfamiliar scent. It wasn't the usual laundry smell, but something sweeter, sharper. And it didn't belong to her. Then came the diagnosis: ovarian cancer. I remember the day she sat beside me, held my hand, and spoke slowly. "I'm going to have to fight for a while, Nat, but you don't need to worry. I'll do my best." And during all that time, through exhausting rounds of radiation, IV drips, and days when her hair blanketed the pillow, my father all but disappeared. He called occasionally, said the company was going through a crisis and he had to fly to San Diego, then Chicago, then Dallas. Whenever he came home, he avoided talking to Mom alone, barely asked, "You doing okay?" before turning to me and reminding me to study hard and not trouble her. I wasn't too young to understand. I started noticing the whispered phone calls out on the balcony, the messages he tried to hide, the faint lipstick stains on his white collars. My mother noticed too. But she didn't say anything, didn't cry. She simply kept going with her treatment, as if shielding me from the truth was more important than the pain she bore. And then one day, I accidentally opened the wrong file drawer in my father's home office. I had been looking for my school records when I came across a birth certificate tucked between a few contracts. It was old, but the details were clear. Mother's name, Samantha Ruiz. Father's name, Franklin Burke. Child's name, Lily Ann Burke. Date of birth: the 4th of July, about 4 months after my mom began chemotherapy. I stood frozen, staring at that name like it was a code to some alternate universe. I didn't cry. I just folded the paper, put it back exactly where I found it, and closed the drawer. I figured if I never said anything, maybe my mother wouldn't have to know. And if she didn't know, maybe she wouldn't hurt any more than she already did. But deep down, I knew she already knew. She had always known. My mom passed away on a morning in October, just as red leaves began to fall across the yard. I remember sitting by her bedside, her hand growing colder, her breaths thin and fragile like strands of thread. In her final moments, she said nothing about my father. Not a word of bitterness. Only a whisper. "Live for yourself, Nat. Don't sacrifice for those who don't deserve it." I held her hand tightly, trying to memorize every word, every line at the corners of her eyes so I'd never forget. Right after the funeral, everything changed so fast I could barely catch my breath. My father made his relationship with Samantha public, as if it had always been normal. He brought her into the house, into the home that once belonged to my mother, along with Lily. There were no apologies. No explanations. Just a statement. From now on, we'll be living as a new family. I was 16, and that afternoon, I packed up my things from my mom's room and moved into the old guest room because Samantha wanted to freshen up the master bedroom. Lily got her own room painted pink, dreamy cloud-shaped lights strung from the ceiling. And I was left to sleep in what used to be my mother's reading space. I didn't argue. Didn't cause a scene. I stayed silent just like my mother used to, because I knew that not everything broken can be fixed. And sometimes, silence is the only way to survive in a family that stopped seeing you as one of their own a long time ago. But from that moment on, I started counting down in my head the days until I could finally leave this place and build a life my mother once hoped I'd have. A life not trapped in the shadow of people who chose betrayal and called it a new beginning. I left home the moment I could. When I got accepted into UCLA, I didn't wait for fall. I enrolled in the summer program, signed up for dorm housing, used a student credit card to buy a few essentials, and drove my mom's old Toyota Corolla toward Westwood, leaving behind everything my father now called a family. I told them I needed to focus on school and internships and didn't want to move back and forth. But the truth was, I couldn't bear to step into that house anymore, the place where my mother's voice once filled every morning, now overtaken by sounds I didn't belong to. All through college, I only returned home during the holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, sometimes my father's birthday, though I had to remind myself because no one ever called to invite me. The first time I came back after my first semester, I stood frozen at the door of my old bedroom, the room I once called my safe space. My desk, where I used to write essays, was now covered in beauty products, toner, essence, sheet masks, every kind of expensive serum. The mirror was covered in stickers spelling out, Lily's self-care corner. My mother's bookshelf had been taken down, her books packed into a cardboard box and pushed into the corner like the past had to be cleared out to make room for the new leading lady. I asked my dad, "Where are my things?" He pointed under the bed and said, "Down there." I didn't want to throw them away, so I put them in a box. Lily needs space to study and do her skincare routine, you understand, right? I looked over at Samantha, who was arranging flowers at the dining table. She shrugged slightly and smiled. "The house is a bit crowded now. We all have to be flexible, sweetheart." Lily kept her head down, not meeting my eyes. For a split second, I saw something flicker in her expression as if she, too, sensed that something wasn't right, but then she turned away and continued pressing down her glittery pink fake nails. That evening, when I picked up a framed photo of my mom from the kitchen shelf, a picture of her in her white coat at the pediatric clinic, Franklin stopped me. "Those things should be put away now," he said. "It just brings pain to keep looking at them. Best to keep the memories in your heart." In my heart? As if memories of my mother were some kind of nuisance to be folded away like an old, outdated photo album. I didn't respond. I quietly carried the frame to my car, set it down beside the driver's seat, and drove straight back to Santa Barbara the next morning. Every time I visited that house, I found new reasons to cut the trip short. I'd say I had a lab report due, or that I had to return early to assist in a Python programming class. But the truth was, I could only breathe again after driving the nearly 2 hours to Santa Barbara and pulling up in front of the little red-roofed house with golden daisies blooming at the porch, the house where my grandfather had lived alone since his wife passed away. He always opened the door with the same familiar greeting. "Little Nat is here." No one had called me Little Nat since my mom died. In his house, the watercolor painting my mom made at 16 still hung in the living room, a beach at sunset with a small handwritten line, "The place I belong." On his desk sat the old mug she gave him for Veterans Day, the one that read, "World's Greatest Dad, verified by Madison Burke." Each visit, I'd sit with him on the back porch, listening to him tell stories about his time in the military, about my parents when they were dating, or about the nights my mom would stop by after finishing a late hospital shift. He never pried, just quietly refilled my tea and let me decide when I was ready to talk. "Grown-ups making mistakes doesn't mean you're the one who's wrong," he once told me when I was on the verge of tears, forcing a smile. "That house won't fall without you. But your life might, if you keep forcing yourself to fit into a place that no longer has room for you." Every time I left Santa Barbara, I felt a little lighter, as if someone out there still believed I was worthy, still remembered the version of me that existed before life was rewritten by betrayal. And so I kept living that way, caught between two worlds. One was UCLA, where I fought to prove myself among brilliant classmates. The other was my grandfather's red-roofed home, where I could simply be myself without trying. As for that other house, I started calling it something different in my mind, their house. Because clearly, it was no longer mine. When I arrived, my grandfather was watering the lavender bushes on the porch. He saw me, gave a small nod, and didn't ask anything. I didn't say a word either, not until we were sitting across from each other at the familiar dining table with the grilled salmon he'd made using the handwritten recipe my mother once left him. I told him everything. All of it. About how Dad brought Samantha and Lily to my graduation. About what happened afterward, how there were no congratulations, no words of acknowledgement, just a cold ultimatum, like I was a rechargeable wallet he expected to use now that I had my degree. I kept my voice steady as I spoke, refusing to let tears interrupt me. But when I got to the last line, "If you refuse, then starting next week, don't come back home," I couldn't hold it anymore. I lowered my head, hands clenched together on the table, trying to suppress a sob. My grandfather didn't speak right away. He simply got up, walked over to the old oak filing cabinet in the corner of the living room, the one I'd only ever seen him open when he needed tax documents, water bills, or old maps. But this time, he pulled out the bottom drawer, the one I'd never seen opened before. He retrieved a brown folder, old but well-preserved, and brought it back to the table, placing it gently in front of me. "Do you know whose name is on the deed for the house in Pasadena?" he asked, his voice deep and steady, the way he always spoke when he was still in the military. I looked up and blinked. "I thought it was my parents." He nodded. "Your mother thought so too, but it's not. That house belongs to me." I opened the folder. Inside was a copy of the property deed, the owner's name printed clearly. Robert Ellison. Purchase date: 1999, 2 years before I was born. I turned to the next page, a wire transfer receipt from his personal bank account to the seller's account, with a handwritten note attached. "Gift to Madison Ellison after wedding." My hands trembled when I saw his handwriting, slanted, firm, and full of pride. "I bought that house after your mother married Franklin," he said slowly, his eyes fixed on the photo behind me, my mother on her wedding day, smiling radiantly. "She didn't want me to worry. But I wanted to give her a solid start. Franklin knew. Your mother knew. But back then, they both believed that as long as they lived together, whose name was on the paperwork didn't really matter." I held the folder tightly. "She never told me. Because she trusted Franklin," he said softly. "And she never thought there'd come a day when I'd have to use this to restore justice for her daughter." I couldn't speak. My throat closed up. He continued, "I've seen it all these past years. You've endured far more than you should have. You didn't say anything, but I still knew. The way you looked at that house every time you came back. The way you quietly stared at your mother's photo being packed away. I knew because I once watched my own daughter be abandoned in a marriage she gave too much to." I said nothing, only let the tears fall silently down my cheeks. For the first time in years, I didn't feel ashamed for breaking down. With him, I didn't have to be strong. "Now listen to me," he said, placing a hand on the folder. "That house has always been under my name. From the very beginning. Never transferred, never mortgaged. No one but me has the right to decide what happens to it, and I've made my decision." I looked up. "I'm giving you full rights to the house. Starting now, you don't need anyone's permission. I'll call the lawyer first thing in the morning. The transfer of usage rights will begin immediately. Franklin has no power to kick you out of the place you once called home because he never owned it to begin with." I stood frozen. It felt like someone had finally switched on the light in a room I had lived in far too long in the dark. "Are you sure you want to do this, Grandpa?" I whispered. "Dad's going to be angry, and Samantha will." "I don't care what they think," he cut in, his eyes sharp as steel. "I only care about whether my daughter and granddaughter are treated fairly. And if they've been living in a house that isn't theirs, enjoying a life paid for by my daughter's money, then it's time they learn how to leave." I smiled through my tears, feeling for the first time in years what it meant to be chosen. Not out of duty. Not for my role in some patched-up family. But because I deserved it. And for the first time, I understood something. Justice doesn't always arrive in the form of revenge. Sometimes, it comes from the clarity of those who love you quietly, who've prepared everything in silence, just waiting for the moment you're hurt enough to finally claim what should have always been yours. I stayed the night at my grandfather's house. It was the first time in months that I fell asleep without worrying about tuition, without waking in the middle of the night from nightmares that I had no place to return to. The next morning was simple. Toast, scrambled eggs, and my grandfather in his silver-striped pajamas, making coffee like it was just another Sunday. But it wasn't. Today was the day I reclaimed fairness. Not through rage, not through retaliation, but through truth, through clarity. And through a grandfather who had silently stood guard for so long, I'd forgotten anyone was still on my side. By just before 9, we were on the road to Pasadena. I drove. Grandpa sat in the passenger seat. And in the back was a brown leather briefcase. Inside it were the property deed, legal consultation documents, and a letter Grandpa had written the night before. With us was a woman in her 40s, dressed in a pale gray suit, her hair neatly tied back, her gaze sharp. She was my grandfather's private attorney. Her name was Denise Clark. And she knew exactly what she was doing. As we pulled into the cul-de-sac, I saw Franklin's car still parked in its usual spot right in front of the lawn. The house looked just as it always did whenever I came home for the holidays, except this time, I wasn't walking in as a daughter visiting. I was arriving as the rightful owner. Denise stepped up first and knocked on the door. Samantha answered. Her eyes flickered with panic for a second when she saw the small group in front of her. But quickly, she regained her usual composure. I once thought that was her strength until I realized that composure was just a mask used to justify her habit of stepping over others. I'm sorry, Samantha said politely. Franklin isn't home at the moment. If you need to leave a message. I'm the legal counsel of Mr. Robert Ellison, Denise interrupted, not smiling. We're here to deliver an official notice. This property is no longer under the use of Mr. Franklin Bennett. The legal owner of this land is Mr. Franklin, Robert Ellison, and he has signed over full usage rights to his granddaughter Miss Natalie Ellison Bennett. The air on the front porch froze solid. Samantha stared wide-eyed at my grandfather. That's impossible. We've lived here for nearly 10 years. No one's disputing that, Denise continued. But living here for 10 years doesn't mean you legally own the property. On official records, this house was never transferred. And now, the deed holder has chosen to end the informal arrangement. I didn't say a word. I simply stood behind my lawyer, clutching my bag, heart pounding. But not from fear. It was something else. For the first time, I was witnessing the power of silence. The power of truth. Samantha let out a sharp breath and turned to walk back inside. About 5 minutes later, Franklin burst out of the house like a living storm of rage. Same face my father's, but now drenched in sweat and flushed with fury. You think you're clever, huh? He growled. You think getting a college degree gives you the right to turn on your own family? I fed you every damn day. And now you side with that old man to kick me out of my own house? You ungrateful brat. Still, I said nothing. I didn't fight back. I didn't need to. I reached into my bag, took out my phone, opened the voice recorder app, and hit play. Franklin's voice filled the air, clear and undeniable. Lily got into USC, but the tuition's high. Her mom and I don't have enough. Now that you've graduated, help your sister. If you refuse, then starting next week, don't come back home. Franklin froze. He recognized his own voice. I wasn't threatening anyone. I was simply letting them hear what they had once said to me. Lily stepped out from behind her mother. She said nothing. Her expression was quiet, conflicted, like she didn't know which side to stand on, like she'd just realized she'd been unknowingly standing on someone else's shoulders all this time. Grandpa stepped forward. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. I once hoped you were reasonable, he said, looking Samantha straight in the eyes. I once believed, even if I was wrong, that a woman who went from being a colleague to a stepmother could treat her husband's child with decency. But I was wrong. You've repeated what society always does to inconvenient children, discard them. No one replied. Samantha lowered her head. Franklin turned away. Denise raised a stack of documents. I'll be leaving the formal notice here. Mr. Franklin's household has 72 hours to gather their belongings and vacate the premises. After that, we will proceed with legal enforcement. No one stopped us as we left. No one had anything else to say. Only the sound of the gate clicking shut behind me, so soft it was almost inaudible, but to me, it was the final note closing an old chapter. A chapter in which I had been forced to play the outsider in the story of my own life. On the drive back to Santa Barbara, Grandpa didn't say a word. Neither did I. But inside me, there was no more storm. No more whirlwind of anger or choked back tears. Only one thing remained. Relief. I would return to that house not as someone who had been cast out, but as someone with a key. As the new owner. As someone who finally had a place to stay and didn't need permission to be there. 3 days later, I returned to Pasadena to formally take possession. The sky that day was unnaturally blue, as if the universe itself wanted to witness a new chapter begin, one without guilt, one without begging to belong. Grandpa came with me, wearing the same old suit he used to wear to important meetings when he was still working. I knew he didn't need to be there, but he came anyway. Not to shield me, but to stand with me as witness. That this time, I was stepping into that house not as a leftover. As soon as we turned onto the street, I saw Franklin's silver SUV parked tightly along the curb, trunk already open. A few cardboard boxes were stacked loosely inside. The front door was slightly ajar. I stopped at the bottom of the steps and took a deep breath. My grandfather placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "Let's go, this is your home now." I stepped inside. The house was strangely quiet, as if it had grown tired from witnessing too much. Along the hallway, the green rug I was once forbidden to step on as a child had been rolled up and pushed to the side. The living room was bare. No more family photos on the shelf. No trace of the strong-scented wax sprays Samantha used to mist around every afternoon. I walked straight toward the staircase. As I reached the landing halfway up, I saw Lily packing the last of her books into her backpack. She turned when she heard my footsteps, her eyes settling on me not with anger, not with fear, but with a quiet, unreadable confusion that ran deeper than I could interpret. I gave a slight nod. Lily lowered her head. A real bow. Not an apology, not an excuse. Perhaps it was the only way a child raised in favoritism knew how to acknowledge that something had gone wrong and that she had seen it, too. I said nothing. I didn't need her to say anything either. When I came back downstairs, Samantha was in the kitchen, wiping down the glass door of the fridge like it was the last thing that truly mattered. She heard me, but didn't turn. She didn't speak. Didn't ask a question. Not a single word. I used to think that if this day ever came, it would be a battle that they would resist, argue, maybe even call the police. But no shouting, no resistance. They left. Quietly. As if even they knew this ending was inevitable, lawful, justified, and far too late to undo. Franklin was the last to walk out. He wore the same silver-striped shirt my mother had once given him for his birthday, now wrinkled and dust-speckled. In his hand was a cream-colored envelope. He didn't look at me, just placed it on the table by the door, then walked out of the house. No goodbye, not even a glance. I stepped over and opened the envelope. Inside was a single photo. I recognized it, instantly taken the summer I turned 13, at Lake Arrowhead. My mother was hugging me from behind, both of us laughing, while Franklin poured orange juice into Lily's glass. We had once been a family. Once. Not anymore. There were no words on the back. No message. Just a memory left behind like a vague piece of evidence, too painful to hold on to, too human to throw away. I walked slowly upstairs, back to my old room. The door still bore the scratch marks from where I used to tape posters and tear them down. Inside, the room was empty. No more Lily's perfume. No more vanity mirror. Just soft sunlight pouring in through the window. That light, in that moment, made the small room feel like it had a soul again. My grandfather stepped in behind me. He quietly looked around, then smiled. "Shall we start over?" I nodded. That entire afternoon, we stayed in the room. I peeled off the old adhesive hooks from the walls, dusted off the wooden floor. Grandpa brought in paint, soft cream, the exact shade my mother had chosen when I was in middle school. His hands trembled slightly, but he still tried to paint evenly. I painted alongside him. Each stroke felt like I was cleansing the years that had been hidden, blurred, pushed aside. That evening, we rehung my mother's photo, a portrait of her reading in the garden, her hair gently lifted by the breeze, her eyes bright and serene. I placed it right above my desk. The same spot. The only spot I had ever seen it from each morning when I woke up. I sat on the bed, looking around the room that now, truly, belonged to me. No one could force me out again. No one could tell me to make room, to go along, or to just deal with it. This was my home. Not because I fought for it, not because I begged, but because I had survived long enough to walk back in as myself. Grandpa gently closed the door. I listened to his footsteps slowly descending the stairs. That night, I sat for a long time by the window, watching moonlight stretch softly across the neighbors' rooftops. I didn't cry, I didn't feel triumphant, I just felt enough. And in that sense of enough, for the first time, I started to imagine a future that didn't revolve around needing someone's approval. A future I could build myself. Starting from the very place that once pushed me out. 3 weeks after moving back in, when the walls of the bedroom had dried and Mom's photo had returned to its rightful place, I stepped into the backyard and stared at the faded garage door. That space had once held my mom's car and boxes of her old keepsakes. Later, Franklin turned it into a storage area, then Samantha filled it with Christmas bins, gym equipment, and Lily's unused stuff. Now, looking at it, I saw something different. An opportunity. A beginning. I pulled out my phone and searched. Garage remodel for counseling space. I didn't have much money, but I had time, I had my hands, and I had a reason to begin. I wrote the project's name in my notebook. Second Voice Counseling. Second voice, because I had once been the second voice in my own family. The voice no one heard, the one no one chose to believe, and I knew I wasn't alone. Out there were hundreds, maybe thousands of kids like me, raised in houses they thought were safe, only to find them colder than the street. People who learned to stay silent in order to survive. People who learned to shrink themselves just to be allowed to stay. I wanted to give them a place where they didn't have to beg just to be allowed to stay. I started by clearing everything out. I called an electrician to install a new wiring system. I scraped peeling paint off the ceiling myself and replaced the insulation panels. A former classmate who had worked for an NGO supporting students at UCLA introduced me to a young architect freshly graduated who offered to design the space for free because the idea was just too good. We chose a deep brown leather armchair set, added a low bookshelf filled with over 30 of my favorite titles from The Body Keeps the Score to attached. I hung a small whiteboard near the desk. The first line I wrote on it was, "Your pain is real. Your story matters." Within a month, Second Voice Counseling officially opened its doors. The office was small, just enough to sit 1 or 2 people at a time, but I never needed more than that. I placed a sign outside that read, "Free counseling for students or anyone with family-related trauma." The first person to knock was a student from Cal State LA. His parents had cut off his tuition after he came out as gay. A week later came a young woman whose mother told her, "If you're not going to law school, don't expect rent money." Then came another, and another. Not all of them needed advice. Some just needed someone to sit with them in silence, to know they weren't crazy, weren't wrong, weren't ungrateful for choosing a different life. I worked 6 days a week. Every morning, I opened the doors at 8. Some days I was tired. Some days I sat for hours without a single visitor. But I never questioned my purpose. I knew that every door I opened was the door I had once needed someone to open for me. As for the people who once lived in this house, I didn't ask. But the news still found its way to me. Lily enrolled in community college in Long Beach, nearly an hour's drive from Pasadena. I heard from a mutual friend that she was studying nursing. She didn't call, didn't message. But once, I saw her name on the counseling appointment list, then canceled right after. I wasn't upset. Maybe she wasn't ready. Maybe one day she will be. Samantha moved to Fresno to live with a cousin. I didn't hear anything else. But once, while shopping for groceries, I came across that cousin's Facebook. She'd posted a photo of her kitchen, and in the background, I recognized my mom's old coffee maker. Maybe Samantha took it with her. And that's okay. I don't need it back. Franklin now lives in a rented apartment near Riverside. I only know that because Grandpa received a handwritten postcard sent to the house. Good luck. I hope you do what you believe is right. Franklin. I held the postcard, looking at his handwriting still sharp, but slightly more unsteady than before. No return address, no apology. But also, for once, no sarcasm or threats. I tucked the postcard into a memory box, alongside old letters from my mother. And I didn't write back. I didn't feel the need to play the role of the bigger person. I didn't want to carry the burden of forgiveness just to be seen as worthy. I was simply Natalie, a young woman who was once pushed out of her own home, now using that very home to create a space for others who had also been cast aside. One early autumn afternoon, with cool wind drifting in through the window frame, I sat inside the garage, now my counseling office, cradling a warm cup of tea, watching sunlight filter through the curtains. My mother's photo now sat between two small potted plants. Beneath it was a handwritten letter I'd left for her on my birthday this year, as simple as a quiet announcement. I'm still here, Mom. I'm not leaving again. And this time, I don't have to knock to come back. Lakin art. After years of living like a guest in the very place I grew up, for the first time, I felt like I was truly home, not in a house full of things or comfort, but in a space where my heart no longer had to brace itself just to exist. That spring, Grandpa suggested, how about we bring the backyard garden back, Natalie? Like when your mom was still around. I nodded. I remembered that garden when I was little. My mom would take me out to water the plants, pull weeds. The smell of tomato leaves, the buzzing of bees, her hands covered in soil but still gentle. The summer she died, the garden withered with her. Franklin never cared. Samantha paved it over with tile and a long white bench no one ever used. Grandpa and I started by lifting each tile, one by one. Each carried the dust of time, the weight of memory long buried. It took us nearly 2 days to clear the old soil, and then we planted the first seeds. Cherry tomatoes, cucumbers, a few sprigs of soft lavender, some mint. Grandpa said it'd be nice for morning tea. We didn't plant to harvest, we planted to begin again. Every morning, I woke early, brewed a pot of tea, and stepped out back with 2 small cups. Grandpa was always there first, the Los Angeles Times spread open on the weathered wooden table, his reading glasses slipping down his nose. I handed him his tea, then sat beside him and opened whatever book I was in the middle of. Some days it was Man's Search for Meaning, others Educated. We didn't talk much, but something quiet grew between us, peace. One morning, in early May, just as the sun rose and light streamed through the lemon tree branches at the far end of the yard, Grandpa put down his paper and turned to me. You know, Natalie, he said, his voice deep but gentle. People can choose the wrong partner. But I never chose the wrong granddaughter. I looked at him. His eyes, clouded now with age, still held their old steadiness. His hand rested on the teacup, trembling slightly but warm. I didn't say a word. I just nodded, smiled softly, and let my heart melt. There weren't words like, thank you or, me too, that could ever fully capture the depth of my gratitude for this man, the one who had quietly stood behind my mother, and now behind me, through all the years when the people who were supposed to protect me had turned away. I used to believe what they always said, family is blood. But now I see it clearly. Blood might be the reason something begins, but it's not what keeps it alive. Family isn't the place you're born. It's the place where you're seen, chosen, and loved without conditions. He chose me, not because I reminded him of someone, not because I met anyone's expectations, but simply because I was me. That afternoon, while he took his nap, I stepped out into the garden and pulled a few weeds growing around the lavender. The sunlight fell gently across my hands, golden like honey. Something in my chest quietly melted like frost after winter. A part of me, long braced for survival, finally exhaled. I whispered, not sure if to myself or to my mom, or to grandpa, or to every other Natalie out there. I don't have to stay by sacrificing parts of myself. I don't have to endure in order to be allowed in. I just have to choose the people who chose me first. And I know I chose right. If you've made it this far, chances are you've been like me, standing inside a house you once called home, feeling like a guest. Not because you were unfamiliar, but because someone made you believe you no longer belonged. That you weren't kind enough, soft enough, obedient enough to be worth keeping. That the moment someone else showed up, you became the burden that needed replacing. Let me tell you something clearly and without any poetry. You are not wrong for feeling hurt. You are not weak for being sad. You are not selfish for being disappointed when you were left behind. And you are definitely not ungrateful for walking away from the place that suffocated you. People love to praise forgiveness as the highest virtue. But very few will tell you that some wounds don't need to be healed by going back. Some doors are best left closed. And some relationships, if they demand your dignity in exchange for survival, are simply not worthy of your love. I once thought I had to become better, kinder, more successful to be seen by my father. That I had to earn my way back to the family table. But then I realized real love doesn't require qualifications. It doesn't measure you by grades, by money, by compliance. And it never comes from those who only love you when you're silent and doing what they expect. Maybe right now you're in a house that feels cramped, not from lack of space, but from the absence of acceptance. Maybe you're sleeping in a room full of memories, but it feels hollow because no one truly sees you anymore. Maybe you're trying just hard enough to be good so they don't push you out, quiet enough so you won't make trouble. But please don't let anyone make you believe you need to shrink just to fit in their version of love. You don't have to prove anything. You don't have to earn back love with good grades, a better paycheck, or endless effort that leaves you exhausted. Real love is not something you win, it's something that's given freely. And if someone puts conditions on loving you, that's not love, that's control. You don't need to be chosen to have worth. You already have worth simply because you exist. Because you dare to feel. Because you keep walking forward with wounds in your heart. Because you still choose kindness, even after being treated unfairly. I'm not writing this to tell you that everything will be okay soon. Because sometimes, it won't be. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes the pain stays like a quiet ache. But I want you to know, you are not alone, and every day you choose yourself, you are healing something in the past, not just for you, but for everyone who's ever been like you. Choose yourself again. You don't need anyone's permission, you don't need anyone's approval. Build a place where you never have to beg to stay, whether it's a tiny apartment, a modest desk, or simply a corner of your heart where it feels safe enough to breathe. Because sometimes, the bravest thing isn't forgiving or forgetting. It's continuing to live a life full of love after being taught you didn't deserve one. And if no one has ever said this to you, let me be the first. You are worthy. Not because you're perfect, but because you're you. And that is enough.